Imagine stepping into a Dublin pub in 2015. You're nursing a €6 pint of Guinness. Rain hammers against the window because, well, it's Ireland. The roads outside are gridlocked. Your rent just went up again. Your best friend just booked a one-way ticket to Sydney because buying a house here is nothing but a distant fantasy. Then you pull out your phone and check the news. Ireland's economy grew by 26.3% in a single year. Wait, what? 26.3%. Let that number sink in for a moment. That's not "we had a good year" growth. That's not "the economy is booming" growth. That is, we literally discovered vibranium under cork levels of growth. For context, China during its most explosive industrial expansion was hitting maybe 10% growth. The United States considers 3 to 4% growth fantastic. But Ireland? 26.3%. You look around the pub. Nothing has changed. There are no flying cars. The hospitals are still overwhelmed. Your wallet feels exactly the same weight. The person next to you is complaining about rent prices. So where is all this money? Welcome to the bizarre, infuriating, and absolutely fascinating world of Leprechaun Economics, a term coined by Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman because the numbers were so absurd they belonged in a fairy tale. Today we're going to dismantle the illusion of the Celtic tiger. We're exposing how a rainy island nation became the world's most sophisticated corporate laundromat, how your iPhone is technically Irish, and why GDP might be the biggest lie in modern economics. This isn't just an Irish story. This is a masterclass in late-stage capitalism, where countries compete to become tax havens and the line between economic growth and accounting tricks has completely disappeared. Buckle up. This is going to be a wild ride. If that sounds like something you'd order at 2 a.m. after too many drinks, you're not entirely wrong. But instead of heartburn, this sandwich generates billions in tax-free profits. For decades, this was the holy grail of corporate tax avoidance. It's the foundation of Ireland's phantom economy. To understand how Ireland's GDP became a complete hallucination, you need to understand this legal structure. Imagine yourself as the CEO of a massive American tech company. Let's call it Pear. You sell billions worth of phones, laptops, and services globally. But you have a problem. The United States wants you to pay 35% corporate tax and you find that offensive. You want to pay close to zero. Enter Ireland. Here's how you build the perfect tax sandwich. Layer 1, the first Irish company. You set up a subsidiary in Ireland. Let's call it Pear Island Head Office. Now here's where it gets clever. Under Irish law at the time, a company was tax resident where it was managed and controlled, not just where it was incorporated. So you incorporate this company in Dublin, but you hold all the board meetings in Bermuda or the Cayman Islands. According to Irish law, this company is foreign. According to US law, it's Irish. It's a stateless ghost. It exists nowhere for tax purposes. It's Schrodinger's corporation. Layer 2, the Dutch slice. You can't send money straight to the Bermuda-controlled company without triggering withholding taxes. So you insert a Netherlands company as a conduit. Why the Netherlands? Because EU laws allow royalty payments to move between member states tax-free. It's a legislative backdoor and multinationals drove trucks full of cash through it. Layer 3, the second Irish company. This is the worker bee. This company actually sells products to customers in Europe and is fully tax resident in Ireland. They handle the real business. Here's the magic trick. A customer in Paris buys an iPhone for €1,000. They pay the second Irish company. This company has massive revenues, but wait, they owe enormous royalty fees for using Pear's brand, patents, and intellectual property. They pay this royalty to the Dutch company, which wipes out almost all their profits. Minimal taxes in Ireland. The Dutch company is just a mailbox. They immediately transfer the money to the first Irish company, the one controlled in Bermuda. Thanks to EU treaties, there's no tax on this transfer. The money lands in the Bermuda-controlled account. 0% tax. This wasn't pocket change. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. Google used this. Microsoft used this. Facebook used this. But the absolute king of the sandwich was Apple. In 2016, the European Commission finally said, enough. They launched an investigation that rocked the global economy. They concluded Ireland had granted illegal state aid to Apple. The numbers were staggering. In 2014, one of Apple's Irish subsidiaries paid an effective corporate tax rate of 0.005%. Let me say that again, 0.005%. If you earned €50,000 a year and paid tax at that rate, you'd pay €25. That's less than a coffee and a pastry. Meanwhile, Apple was moving billions. This brings us to that infamous 26.3% GDP growth in 2015. The EU and US started closing these loopholes. The double Irish was being phased out. So what did the multinationals do? They couldn't use the sandwich anymore, so they decided to move their intellectual property onshore. Suddenly, billions of dollars worth of patents, trademarks, and copyrights were legally relocated from Caribbean islands directly onto Irish balance sheets. Overnight, Ireland's capital assets skyrocketed. But here's the thing, literally nothing happened on the ground. No new factories were built. No new jobs were created. It was just accountants in offices moving decimal points and changing country codes and spreadsheets. Paul Krugman looked at the data and dubbed it Leprechaun Economics, a pot of gold that didn't actually exist. The Irish embassy in Washington actually complained to the New York Times that the term was an unacceptable slur. Which, in retrospect, probably wasn't the best PR move. When you're defending 26% GDP growth that nobody in your country actually felt, maybe stay quiet. You might think, good for Ireland. They gamed the system. But here's the dark reality. When your GDP inflates by 26%, your contribution to the EU budget goes up. Ireland actually had to pay more money to the European Union because of this fake growth. Furthermore, it destroys your economic dashboard. If you're a policymaker trying to figure out if your economy is overheating, you can't trust the numbers anymore. You're flying blind. It got so bad that Ireland's central bank had to invent a completely new metric called GNI star, modified gross national income. They literally had to delete the multinationals from the calculations just to see what was happening in the real economy. When you switch from GDP to GNI star, the Irish economy suddenly shrinks by about 200 billion euros, roughly 40%. That's the gap between the holographic economy and reality. Visualize this scenario. You're walking down a street in Dublin's financial district. You see a modest 5-story office building. Beige bricks. Standard windows. Looks completely unremarkable. Then you check the company registry. Inside this one building there are 200 companies. Combined, they control assets worth $50 billion. You walk inside expecting a bustling trading floor, analysts shouting, phones ringing. Instead, you find a receptionist and a filing cabinet. Welcome to the world of brass plate companies, firms that exist purely as nameplates on walls. This leads us to one of the most disturbing economic concepts of our time, Phantom FDI, foreign direct investment. Normal FDI means a foreign company comes to your country, builds a factory, hires locals, and makes stuff. That's real investment that creates jobs and adds value. Phantom FDI is when money flows through a country solely to lower a tax bill. No jobs. No factories. Zero value to actual society. An IMF study estimated that 40% of all global foreign direct investment is phantom. That's $15 trillion of ghost money. And Ireland? It's one of the world's biggest parking lots for this phantom cash. At one point, U.S. investment in Ireland exceeded U.S. investment in China, India, Russia, and Brazil combined. Think about that for a second. Ireland has 5 million people, about the size of South Carolina. China, India, Russia, and Brazil combined have billions of people. Yet on paper, American companies thought Ireland was a better place to invest. They weren't investing in Ireland. They were investing through Ireland. Ireland has specific legislation called Section 110, originally created to help financial companies manage assets. It morphed into something much darker. After the 2008 financial crisis, vulture funds and hedge funds started using Section 110 companies to buy up distressed Irish mortgages. Envision this scenario: you lose your job in 2009. You can't pay your mortgage. The bank sells your loan to a Section 110 company owned by a Wall Street hedge fund. This fund aggressively pursues you for the debt. You might lose your house. But here's the twist. That Section 110 company collecting your mortgage payments pays virtually zero tax on its profits. So the Irish government lost tax revenue, you lost your house, and a brass plate company in the Dublin Docklands funneled the profit back to Wall Street. This is the human cost of Phantom FDI. It's not abstract. It's a system where capital has more rights than citizens. You know what dropshipping is, right? A teenager sets up a website, you buy something, they order it from China, and it ships directly to you. They never touch the product. Now imagine that teenager is a trillion-dollar corporation, and the website is the entire country of Ireland. This is called contract manufacturing, and it's the biggest distorter of Irish trade statistics. Here's how it works. Apple Ireland owns the intellectual property for the iPhone. They contract Foxconn in China to manufacture the phones. When Foxconn finishes a phone, Apple Ireland buys it for maybe $200, then sells it to a customer in Germany for $800. The phone travels from China directly to Germany. It never comes within 5,000 miles of Dublin. But Ireland's Central Statistics Office counts that $800 sale as an Irish export. Because of this accounting fiction, Ireland looks like an absolute manufacturing juggernaut. The statistics show Ireland as one of the largest exporters of pharmaceuticals and medical devices in the world. Yes, there are real factories in Cork and Dublin making Viagra and Botox. Fun fact, Ireland is the Viagra capital of the world. But a huge chunk of those exports are phantom goods, produced elsewhere, shipped elsewhere but billed through Dublin. This inflates Ireland's trade surplus. Normally, a massive trade surplus signals a healthy, productive economy. But in Ireland's case, the money from those exports doesn't stay in the economy. It immediately flows back out as royalty payments or dividends to shareholders. It's like claiming you're a millionaire because you held a bag of cash for someone for 10 minutes. Sure, technically you had $1 million, but you couldn't spend it. This makes GDP completely useless as a measurement tool. In most countries, GDP measures economic size. In Ireland, GDP measures the size of the tax avoidance scheme. Here's a fact that sounds fake but is absolutely real. Over 60% of all leased commercial aircraft in the world are managed from Ireland. If you board a plane, Delta, Emirates, Lufthansa, doesn't matter, there's a better than 50-50 chance that plane is technically Irish. This started legitimately. Tony Ryan, founder of Ryanair, created Guinness Peak Aviation in the 1970s. He realized airlines are terrible at owning planes because aircraft are expensive depreciating assets. So he started buying planes and leasing them out. Brilliant business model. Ireland built genuine expertise around this. But then the tax consultants got involved. Ireland offers incredibly favorable depreciation schedules for aviation assets. Every major leasing company set up shop in Dublin. This seemed fine until February 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine. The West slapped unprecedented sanctions on Russia. Suddenly, Dublin leasing companies had a massive problem. They had hundreds of airplanes worth billions of dollars sitting in Moscow and St. Petersburg, leased to Russian airlines like Aeroflot. The companies said, "Give us our planes back." Putin effectively said, "No. These are our planes now." Russia re-registered the aircraft and essentially stole them. This triggered one of the biggest insurance battles in history. But it also exposed the fragility of this paper economy. Billions of dollars in assets vanished overnight, assets that had been inflating Irish statistics. The aviation sector is a perfect microcosm of the entire system. 1. Massive assets on paper. 2. Very few actual employees relative to asset value. 3. Huge vulnerability to geopolitical shocks. 4. Tax bills that make the rest of us cry. Let me pose a question. If someone told you that you were moving to the second richest country in Europe just behind Luxembourg, what would you imagine? High-speed trains. Free healthcare that actually works. Affordable housing. Maybe gold-plated sidewalks. Welcome to the Irish reality. Economists have a metric called AIC, actual individual consumption. Unlike GDP, which measures what corporations make, AIC measures what you, the actual human being, can afford to consume. In GDP terms, Ireland is a superstar. But in AIC, standard of living, Ireland drops below the EU average. The average Irish person is statistically poorer in terms of consumption than people in Italy or Lithuania. How is this possible? Where is all the money going? It's going into the rent. As of late 2025, average monthly rent in Dublin exceeds €2,390, and that's if you can even find a place. Consider this scenario. You're a young professional working for a tech company in Dublin, making €60,000. Not bad, right? You start looking for an apartment. You find a listing for a studio at €2,000 per month. You arrive at the viewing. There's a line of 50 people down the block. When you finally get inside, you realize the studio is a kitchen with a bed squeezed into it. You can literally stir your pasta while lying under your duvet. This isn't an exaggeration. House prices have risen 91% from 2015 to 2024, while rents have jumped 78%, compared to overall inflation of just 22%. Remember those Section 110 companies paying zero tax? They're buying up entire apartment blocks. Global investment funds snap up hundreds of homes to rent them back to Irish people at sky-high prices. Because these funds pay virtually no tax on rental income, they can outbid any normal family trying to buy a home. As Father Peter McVerry, who has worked with Ireland's homeless for 40 years, stated, "We have record levels of homelessness, record house prices, record rents." The Irish economy is essentially a funnel. It collects money from Irish workers and pours it into the pockets of global asset managers. All while the GDP chart points upward and politicians pat themselves on the back. Ireland doesn't just sell low taxes. It sells protection, specifically, protection from European regulations. Under EU law, GDPR, if a tech company has its European headquarters in Dublin, it's primarily regulated by the Irish Data Protection Commission, the DPC. This is called the one-stop shop mechanism. This means if a German citizen has a complaint about Facebook's data practices, Germany can't really touch Facebook. They have to ask the Irish regulator to handle it. And for years, Ireland's regulator has been, let's say, sleepy. Enter Max Schrems, an Austrian privacy activist who has become Facebook's worst nightmare. For a decade, Schrems has been screaming that the Irish DPC bottlenecks enforcement. He argues Ireland deliberately slow-walks investigations because they don't want to scare away the golden geese. Think about the conflict of interest. The Irish government relies on tech giants for billions in corporate tax. Asking Ireland to aggressively fine and regulate Google and Meta is like asking a landlord to evict his only tenant who pays rent in gold bars. The EU got so frustrated that the European Data Protection Board started overruling the Irish DPC, forcing them to issue bigger fines. So when you click accept on those terms and conditions, you're not just dealing with Silicon Valley. You're dealing with a regulatory system in Dublin designed to keep friction as low as possible for corporations, often at the expense of your privacy. Can this last forever? The walls are closing in. In 2021, after years of pressure, 140 countries agreed to a global minimum corporate tax rate of 15%. Ireland fought this tooth and nail. For decades, their rate was 12.5%, their golden goose. They eventually caved but secured exceptions for smaller companies. You might think Ireland is screwed now. Actually, weirdly, no. In 2022 and 2023, Ireland collected so much corporate tax that they literally didn't know what to do with it. They had budget surpluses in the billions. But here's the terrifying part. Over 50% of all corporate tax in Ireland is paid by just 10 companies. 10. If Tim Cook wakes up tomorrow and moves Apple to Singapore, the Irish economy collapses. If Mark Zuckerberg gets bored and relocates Meta to Dubai, Ireland goes bankrupt. This is the definition of concentration risk. Ireland's Fiscal Advisory Council, the independent watchdog, is screaming from the rooftops. This money is temporary. It's a windfall. Don't spend it on permanent commitments like civil service salaries because it could vanish overnight. It's like winning the lottery every year and assuming you'll keep winning forever. You buy a mansion and a Ferrari, or in Ireland's case, an incredibly expensive children's hospital that's years over budget. But when the lottery stops, you can't pay the maintenance. Ireland is trapped. They've built an entire economy around servicing massive US multinationals. They can't pivot easily. They can't diversify quickly. They've ridden the tiger and now they're afraid to get off. And here's the kicker. It's happening again. In Q1 2025, Irish GDP grew by over 13%, driven by companies rushing to get products into the US before Donald Trump's tariffs hit. The leprechauns are back. Nothing real changed in the Irish economy. But the numbers exploded again because of accounting maneuvers and multinational profit shifting. We've learned nothing. So what have we learned from this deep dive into Ireland's economic wonderland? We've learned that the modern global economy is a layer cake of illusions. 1. The double Irish showed us profits can be stateless ghosts, existing nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. 2. Phantom FDI showed us investment doesn't mean building things. It means parking money where tax collectors can't reach it. 3. Contract manufacturing showed us you can export products you never touched, creating trade surpluses out of thin air. 4. Aviation leasing showed us you can own the sky from a desk in Dublin, until geopolitics reminds you that paper ownership isn't the same as real control. 5. The housing crisis showed us the brutal human cost. You can have spectacular balance sheets while breaking your society. Ireland is a case study in what happens when a nation decides to become a service provider for global capital rather than a home for its citizens. It's a country of staggering wealth on paper and staggering anxiety in practice. It's the world's most successful tax haven disguised as a rainy island with excellent dairy products and charming pubs. The next time you hear a politician or economist brag about GDP growth, remember the leprechauns. Remember that numbers can lie. Remember that a rising tide lifts all boats, but only if you have a boat. If you're swimming, a rising tide just drowns you faster. Ireland is the canary in the coal mine for late-stage capitalism. It's a warning. You can have the best balance sheet in the world and still have a broken society. You can be rich on paper while your young people emigrate because they can't afford homes. You can post record economic growth while nurses queue at food banks. The fundamental question isn't whether Ireland's economic model is clever. It absolutely is. The question is, clever for whom? Not for the young couple trying to buy their first home. Not for the worker paying half their salary in rent. Not for the nurse working double shifts in an underfunded hospital. It's clever for the corporations shifting profits. It's clever for the hedge funds buying distressed assets. It's clever for the consultants designing these schemes. Ireland made a Faustian bargain: economic growth in exchange for economic sovereignty. Paper prosperity in exchange for real community. And the lawyers and accountants? They're already designing the next loophole. Because the 15% minimum tax isn't the end of this story. It's just the next chapter. My money's on the lawyers. The leprechaun at the end of the rainbow isn't hiding gold. He's hiding Excel spreadsheets. And those spreadsheets control more of our world than we'd like to admit. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark arts of global finance, hit that like button. It's tax-free, I promise. Let me know in the comments. Do you think the global minimum tax will stop this, or will the accountants just invent new tricks? And have you ever experienced the consequences of these policies in your own country? Until next time, sleep tight unless you're renting in Dublin.